You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one on one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical, tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1012. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. We have had a number of really interesting series recently. We have been doing our summer series on movers and shakers, a lot of really interesting things coming up and that have happened. If you missed our series that happened over May and June on psychedelic-assisted therapy, make sure you go back and listen to that. We covered ecstasy as medicine. We talked about psilocybin-assisted therapy retreats. We talked about ketamine. We talked about ibogaine, ayahuasca. We talked about politics and access. We talked about all sorts of trainings. It was a really robust series where we talked with people from MAPS. We talked with people all over the place. If that's something that you're interested in, go check that out. Also, a lot of your clients might be interested in those things, and it's just good to be educated on what clients might be asking you about. So that kicked off back in episode 989 on May 9th. We're already in July, and we are in the middle of our Movers and Shakers series. We have some amazing movers and shakers that we're going to be interviewing today. But also, we have Elise coming up, who she was part of Goop and Goop Lab in the Netflix series, talking about some mental health issues. We have a man named Giovanni who's coming up, who is behind Elemental Rhythm Breathwork. So some really interesting podcast interviews that are coming up as well. So make sure you tune in for that whole series throughout July. And then after that, we have Ash, who's going to be coming in. And Ash is one of our consultants here with Practice the Practice. And she's going to be talking about mega group practices. So she has a group practice. I think she's up to 60 people now, 60 clinicians at her practice. So she's going to be doing a 3-part series that's coming up throughout mid-July, kind of digging into some of that, what it takes to have a mega group practice. So all sorts of things coming up for you that I think will be really helpful. But today we have Dr. Michelle Rose, who is the Director and Clinical Coordinator of Clinical Mental Health Counseling at University of Western States. Dr. Rose has a professional background in human development and family sciences. And Dr. Amy Ohana, who is an Associate Professor of Mental Health Counseling at University of Western States. She has over 15 years of experience working as a counselor educator and manages her own clinical supervision practice. Amy, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast. Michelle, welcome as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, well, I am really excited about this topic, the topic of imposter syndrome and burnout, and then, kind of confidence and the science of confidence. You all work with students and, professionals in a lot of different capacities. I want to just start with that topic of imposter syndrome. And Amy, why don't you kick it off for us? I want to talk about, can I just start with, I'll speak from myself. I just hosted a 2-day retreat for some of my one-on-one consulting clients. They flew into Northern Michigan from California, New York, all over the place. And I do this actually in my house because as a single dad, it's a lot easier to just host it here, have my kids off to school. I don't have to go travel for it. But the night before and the morning of, I got this feeling of imposter syndrome where I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these people are flying in to work with me. And there was 2 people that were mega group practice owners, the multi-million-dollar practices, and a couple people that they were just in solo practice. I'm like, what if they don't like each other? What if it doesn't work? What if they're like, I spent all this money to come work with Joe and it just doesn't work? And I recognize, what the heck? This imposter syndrome just blindsided me. And then by the end of it, people were really excited and it worked out fine. When you think about imposter syndrome, specifically with students? Let's just start there. How does that manifest?
That's a great question, Joe. I think imposter syndrome, just to get a little deep here, is a disconnect between the image one projects into the public sphere and how they feel inside about themselves. So it's easy for students to want to project a certain way, to appear competent, to appear confident, but deep inside, they don't feel that way. So they may have certain behaviors to try to make up that difference, or they might suffer silently, not ever reaching out, doing their best to try to perform at the level that they believe they are expected to perform, but silently fearing that they're not actually making it.
Now, I don't know what the research says, and maybe you do or don't. I don't know if this is an area that you've dug into, but in regards to social media, I'm thinking so many of the people that are students now, are at the age that social media has been a large part of most of their life, if not all of their life. And that idea of I'm going to project something into the world, all my vacations, my highlight reel, and then who I am actually isn't even close to what I'm projecting in social media. Does it feel like imposter syndrome is getting worse or getting influenced by that social media mindset? Or would you say that it's not, or maybe that's not even an area that you have the evidence or background in?
I absolutely believe that social media has impacted imposter syndrome in very negative ways and in very great ways. I identify as Generation X. I'm a digital immigrant. I did not grow up with even a cell phone. And I look at the students that I teach today, just the challenges that they have with media images surrounding them and those messages that they are getting around who they are, what they should be doing, how they should be performing. And again, I think that feeds into that ego state, or that idealized image that they feel like they should have.
Mm. Now, Amy, I know you have a clinical supervision practice. How does it really manifest in regards to people that, they've graduated, they're maybe fully licensed or pre-licensed? How does that imposter syndrome start to really manifest in the career?
In my experience, I actually feel like it gets worse after graduation. As a student, there's sort of this inherent principle of, well, you're a student. If you're going to mess up, do it now when you have the support of your program, of your instructors. But I think new clinicians experience sort of this big aha or big reality check when they begin to practice, even if they are working in a group practice or an agency setting where they feel like they should have it all together. They should know at this point. And so it's even easier to try to project that image of competence and confidence.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think that idea of, yeah, you can screw up, you can go talk to people when you're a student. No one expects a whole lot of you in regards to being able to practice clinically. And then you get out in the field, and I mean, I remember my first, year of clients. I'm like, what am I doing here? How am I like able to do this work? Michelle, when you think about imposter syndrome, what comes to mind for you?
I really am going to dive into this social media topic.
Mm,
In 2024, the newest report, the World Happiness Report, came out, and although the US dropped from being ranked in the top 20, I think we were 15th down to maybe 23rd or 24th. What it tells us is that we live in this culture of happy valuation. And social media drives that. We actually curate the image of happy careers, happy lives, as you mentioned, happy vacations. But what we know from the research is that the overvaluation of happy, ironically, has the opposite effect. It makes people more distressed, more disappointed in themselves, and actually puts people at risk for mood disorders. So when we're talking about the social media and the impact on students and professionals alike, what it creates is this persistent self-doubt and the overvaluation of the attributes of others. And I think that's really key in understanding how to help students and professionals with imposter syndrome. It's a two-way street. Not only do they undervalue what they are doing, but they attribute more qualities or better qualities to the other people that they're observing than might be appropriate. And that leads to this constant sense of disappointment or even fear.
Mm. I'm so glad that you touch on the overvaluation of happiness. That's an area that I feel like so often it's like we have been for 100 plus years been told, do you feel sad? Well, there's a product, there's a pill that can solve that, and that like the highest thing that you can feel is joy and happiness and a lack of pain and as much comfort as possible. And to me, when you really step back and look at what does it mean to be human, pain, it's not anything we want, but like that is embedded in the recipe of what it means to be human. That we all have different pains we go through. We learn from pain, and there's just such a push towards happiness and pleasure and comfort. Um, Michelle, how would you kind of frame that out even beyond social media? I love that you talk about the overvaluation of happiness. Like dig into that even more. Like how does that manifest in careers for clinicians?
Yeah, I think we as clinicians still tend to talk on the surface about our practices and our approaches because we know the answers that we're supposed to have. When I'm working even with a licensed clinician and supervising them, particularly both Amy and I do remediating supervision for professionals who may be at risk or have had an ethics issue. And the one thing I hear consistently is I was afraid to reach out to my peers or get consultation because I didn't want them to think negatively of me. And so, even if they're not social media followers, even if they are just in their own little bubble of private practice, it can be a very lonely career. When you think about what we do for a living, we don't really get to talk about our successes or our failures with anybody because we risk then violating the confidentiality of our clients. So, the work that we do becomes very private and very internal. And I think we get into this habit where we're not speaking honestly about both the benefits and challenges of private practice. And therefore, we have no practice at accurately evaluating our strengths and weaknesses as clinician, or even anybody to bounce ideas off of if we feel like we're burning out or we're not being successful or we're struggling with a specific population. It's an industry that makes you feel very isolated, and I'm constantly fighting against that with our supervisees and students.
Mm, yeah. Now, how does that interact with both and Amy, I'll direct this to you. I think that so there's burnout where you're just, going full tilt, you've taken on too much, and there's probably a lot more that goes into burnout. And then I don't know if it's on the other side, if they're like polar opposites, or if you would even frame it that way. But then there's confidence and kind of the science of confidence. In my mind, not being a researcher in this area, it seems like burnout would be kind of an unhealthy, I've taken on too much, and confidence would be knowing here's the boundaries of my professionalism. Here's what I also need outside of my professional life to stay, well and not burned out. First, would you frame it that way? And second, can you kind of talk about those two different seeming polarities?
Sure. Well, first, let's start with burnout. And I love how Michelle brought up the overvaluation of happy, because one of the earliest definitions of burnout from Herbert Freudenberger was really about failed expectations, where specifically people who went into the helping field, Freudenberger's work focused on substance abuse therapists, but it extends to the helping professions. People who choose these professions go into this work with an expectation of sorts, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Typically, those expectations are around helping, maybe feeling a sense of personal satisfaction. Maybe it's motivated by a darker part of the self or the shadow part of the self, like wanting to be a hero, or to rescue people from pain, whatever that expectation is, when it's not met by the work, that is what creates burnout. Now, there's other theories of burnout as well, such as high caseloads or just the physical demands. But I love Freudenberger's definition because it really speaks to the meaning that we hope to have in the work. And when that meaning is not met or fulfilled in some way, that's when clinicians or humans in general begin to experience the symptoms of burnout, which predominantly are emotional exhaustion. And that happens so often in the helping fields, reduced accomplishment, and sort of this attitude of cynicism, or I call it snarkiness, or just sarcasm about the work itself.
Mm. Yeah. So, are there factors in certain jobs that really perpetuate that or create burnout for people? Or, a lot of our listeners are either in private practice or have a side gig private practice or full time giant practice. Are there things that lead, or the evidence says, Amy, that these are some of the trails, some of the common things that lead to burnout?
I think the research, when you look at it, it's focused on external factors. So those things I mentioned, like a high caseload, difficulties in supervision, I think comes up over and over, where there's just a poor fit between supervisor and supervisee, the demands of the system, or the systemic demands and failures. I think those are major contributors to burnout. But those internal characteristics, coping styles, personality, emotional intelligence, those also are part of it. And I think for every individual, their burnout is unique. It's really hard to pinpoint and say, well, these things are happening for you, therefore you must be burned out. It's more of, let's talk about who you are as a person, how you got into this work, what meaning you hold in this work, and then the environmental challenges that you face every day. And let's find ways for you to reconnect within yourself, with your work, and with your higher purpose or meaning that you want to create in the work.
Mm. Now, as
Joel,
you've
can I
looked at the
can I
science,
jump in
oh
there
yeah,
and
jump
add
in,
something?
Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about this topic. Um, One of the concerns that I have, and I love our profession, I've been in it for over 20 years, is that even as a counselor educator, I am guilty of this. We scare students a lot with this idea of imposition of values. We tell students to bracket their values and set them aside to be wholly open to their clients. And I think we've done an injustice to our student that actually leads to burnout. We should be teaching our students and professionals how to value who they are and bring that person into the room in an appropriate and ethical way to engage with clients. Because when you have to set aside who you are for, let's say, 6, 8 hours a day to work with clients, you're constantly, in essence, being asked to put on a costume. Here's what it looks like to be a clinician. And then they walk into the room and they're totally disconnected from their personhood. That is so overwhelming and really hard to maintain in the long term. And I see that as immediate, like the most clear connection or predictor of burnout, considering the professionals that I work with.
Mm. Upheal is an AI-powered platform designed specifically for therapists like us. Now, I know what you might be thinking. AI in therapy, how does that work? Let me tell you, Upheal is a lifesaver when it comes to streamlining your administrative tasks. As therapists, we all know how crucial it is to save time whenever we can. After all, our clients deserve our undivided attention and energy. That's where Upheal comes in. It transcribes, summarizes, and analyzes our therapy sessions, helping us write those detailed progress notes up to 90% faster. Can you imagine saving 6 to 10 hours per week? That's precious time that we can use to see more clients or simply recharge our own batteries. Just a few minutes after you finish a session, you get a pre-drafted editable progress note, complete with session summary and breakdown of all the topics that were covered. It also provides session analytics that help you measure speech-based metrics like talking ratio, speech cadence, sentiment, and tense. Also, it's 100% HIPAA compliant, making it secure for both therapists and clients. The best part, it's available for all EHRs with their browser extension. So if you're ready to experience the game-changing power of AI in your therapy practice, head on over to upheal.io/Joe and let AI write your therapy notes for you. That's upheal.io/Joe. Now, if we think about kind of burnout and confidence, I would love to hear kind of the science of confidence. Like, what can we do to build confidence as clinicians, also as owners that oftentimes have teaching practices? You may have interns, you may have people in practicum that are coming through. How do we build that confidence, Amy?
Well, I love this topic, so I could probably go on and on, but I'll try to nutshell it for you. Confidence is often misunderstood as well as burnout. Confidence, when it's looked at from an externally driven perspective, is about accomplishment or achievement. But when we look at confidence from an internally driven perspective, it really is about belief in the self, that I will show up in the same way every time before, during, and after a task or whatever I'm doing. In this case, it's work performance. So it's really trust in oneself to show up in the ways that I have chosen to show up, that are aligned with my values or my ethical codes. And in that process, I learned to believe in myself over and over and over again and project that into the work with my clients, with my supervisors, and with my colleagues.
Michelle, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'm so excited because we have a very unique program at University of Western States. We have students that enroll in a master's in clinical counseling on the way to a doctorate in sport and performance consulting. So you can imagine that the folks our students are working with, and even our students, are significantly high performers. They're in very stressful situations in which they're called upon at any given time to perform at their very highest level. And what we have learned is that the highest performers aren't thinking to themselves, am I confident today? What they're thinking to themselves are, what are the actions that are going to lead to the task achievement that I'm looking for? So confidence isn't necessarily about this sort of nebulous idea of, oh, if I just believe in myself right now, I'm good. Confidence is built after practice of task and task and task, practice of implementing coping mechanisms. It's almost like perfect practice makes perfect. The more we do something well, the more you understand, as Amy mentioned, that you are going to show up in the way that you want to, regardless of the challenge or the task at hand.
I wonder if in just the last 10 minutes or so here, I could just let the two of you loose and kind of do almost like a mini masterclass, just the two of you talking and interrupting each other, however, thinking through practice owners. So practice owners that are growing their practice, they're bringing people in. Like, what in, say, 5 to 8 minutes would you be like, here's what they need to know? I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to let you two loose. Like, what would they need to know to help their staff overcome or handle imposter syndrome, burnout, and add more confidence?
I'm actually building a practice right now. I've been a counselor educator for 20 years and a clinician for at least that long and longer. And I recently have shifted the focus of my practice into sport and performance work. And I'm experiencing the challenges that new clinicians experience as well, such as, how do I rent office space? How do I find the clients that I want to find? How do I panel with insurance? Do I need a supervisor, even though I am a clinical supervisor? How do I get support in my role? So, Michelle, maybe you could offer me some advice about where to focus and how to go here.
I appreciate that question. I think one of the things that has, at least I've been told, that one of the things that sets me apart in the profession as a supervisor and a consultant to people who are trying to start new practices is that I have a very intense interview process, just like a very detailed assessment when we're seeing a new client. And one of the things I focus on primarily is your prior career experiences. And it doesn't matter if it's in the counseling or mental health field. I want to know what you've done for work and what brings you joy in terms of your hobbies. And I want to translate or leverage those skill sets and that knowledge into the profession or the practice you're trying to build. As an example, and people always get shocked when I say this, before I became a clinician and then a counselor educator, I was a steel fabricator. That means I designed projects from the ground up, and that structural steel that people see when they drive by and see a building going up, I was responsible for that. I was able to leverage successfully my project management experience into teaching because I could understand the foundational components of what needed to be done first, second, and third, create a timeline for getting them done, and translate those skills into the new practice. So that's always my first question, Amy, is what have you done successfully or well? What are you proud of? What are the skill sets you absolutely know you have that can be carried over into your new business model?
Mm.
That is such a great question. And as I'm listening to your story, which I love this story, I love that you were a steel fabricator, among many other things, and that translates so well to your leadership qualities. Um, I have really pretty much always been a counselor and an educator. And I think at this point in my life, I really want to focus my practice on something new. I needed a change.
Mm.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about, what was it for me? And I think for me, it was my experience as a recreational athlete, which, if you were to look at me, you probably wouldn't see me as an athlete. But for me, in my own personal journey, learning how to overcome challenges, learning how to challenge myself, particularly around running or lifting weights, I find the joy in overcoming those challenges and want to offer that to my clients, and probably clients similar to me who are midlife career professional people who want to manage a lot, love their work, also want a very full life where they're physically healthy and able to manage families and juggle the many challenges we have in life, including recreation.
Mm. So awesome. I love that mini master class. Now I know Michelle and Amy, you are friends outside of your professional world, and I would love for you to each speak about the other person in regards to Michelle, we'll start with you. How does Amy overcome imposter syndrome, push back on burnout, and build confidence? Like what do you see in her that she does really well in those areas?
I see that she's very planful. I'll give you a simple example. I'll be have been married for 3 years this coming August, and my husband and I asked her to officiate our ceremony. And she has done this a couple times before, but that's a pretty demanding role. You want to represent a couple and their nuptials and celebrate with them. She sent us this very detailed, like, interview questionnaire about our history together, how we met, what we love about each other, our families, who we want involved in the ceremony. She's a preparer. And what I have loved the most about her is that she doesn't apologize for her preparation. She knows that she can speak on the fly. She is an amazing sort of off the cuff speaker, but she will plan so that she is as prepared as she possibly can. She does it because that's who she is. And it feels like everything she dips her toe into is successful. It's really fun to watch her.
Mm. And Amy, what do you see Michelle do to push back on imposter syndrome, burnout, and to build that confidence?
Michelle is an amazing leader. She's very strong, and I think that she's confident because she has years of experience of overcoming challenges, and she does have that belief and trust in herself. I think one of her very core strengths is boundaries and boundary setting. She's very discerning about situations and able to pull out pieces of information that might be potential problems down the road, or things that might impact a student's development, and bring them to light in a way that is very direct and firm, but also very kind and very growth oriented. And I think that Michelle is a wonderful example of that self trust, learning to trust oneself. I think early in careers, especially in counseling, it's hard to set boundaries. It's hard to even understand what those boundaries might be. But Michelle has learned that from practice over and over and over again, and trusts herself to set them and follow them, and then also role models them for other professionals.
Mhm. So awesome. Well, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know? And Michelle, why don't you kick it off for us?
I think that probably the best thing a clinician, a professional can do is actually invest in taking business courses.
Mm,
Very few counseling programs, as an example, teach business. They don't teach the day to day fundamentals of cash flow management and income and overhead and identification of values or social media strategies or branding. And I think we assume that because as a new professional, we've started to feel comfortable with practice, we can now move into that realm of private practice. And I say, not without understanding the world of business. Business is a whole separate field than that of counseling, and our experience even of positive practices does not mean we're prepared. So I say I want to start teaching students about business, and I think we should never go into private practice until we've done our due diligence to learn some very key concepts.
mm. Amy, what about you?
I would say you can do this work. You can do it, but you can't do it very well if you do it alone. You need support. Even those of you who've been in practice for 10, 15, even 30 years, you still need support. So find good role models, find continuing education that supports you and helps you. I mentioned that because Michelle and I are, as one of our side hustles, we are developing continuing education courses for counselors. Find people who inspire you. Find someone in the profession like you, Joe, who has made it and has something to offer you, and is able to inspire you in your work, but also support you in those nitty gritty skills that you need to learn and need to continue to learn. We are human. We make mistakes. We need support.
Mm, so awesome. Well, if people want to connect with you, I know, Michelle, you have a business basics course. You also have that CE program. Amy, where should we send them?
You can contact us at the University of Western States, and my email address is aohana@uws.edu, and Michelle's is
mirose at uws.edu. And if you're a potential student listening, you can also reach out to our admissions department at admissions@uws.edu.
Mm, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us. This was fun.
I love seeing when people dream beyond their current career path. So often, we've been taught, okay, you're going to take the academic route and you go up that ladder, you get your PhD, you get tenure, all that. And then, you just do research, you follow all those things that you're supposed to do. But I love seeing people like Amy and Michelle who are taking the thing they're passionate about, that research around imposter syndrome, burnout, confidence, all the science of it, and saying, yeah, I want to do some private practice work. I want to build e-courses. I want to build CE. There's so many things that we can do with this knowledge. And that ladder of, okay, I'm going the clinical route or I'm going the academic route, like, it's been totally disrupted. And so if you're feeling stuck in your career, if you're not feeling the same joy maybe you felt a year ago, if you're thinking, I'm interested in things that feel so non-clinical, that's okay. That is totally okay. Back in 2012, when I started Practice of the Practice, it was purely just, I wanted to learn more about private practice and document it on the website and on the podcast. And then over time, I realized, oh my gosh, I like this way better than showing up for clients. And so then I had to make a plan, because no client should have a therapist that dreads them coming and working with them. And so I worked out a plan to slowly taper down how much clinical work I was doing, amp up how much of the podcasting and consulting I was doing, and then eventually selling the practice in 2019. It's okay if you change your mind. It's okay if you have different interests. It's okay if you work full-time somewhere and you want to dip your toes into something else, to maybe even leave that full-time job. Sometimes we just need to hear that permission that, yes, you've worked very hard on your degree and you may change gears. That doesn't mean that all that knowledge that you learned through grad school or a PhD goes away. If anything, it enhances you. Knowing that there are tons of businesses out there that value psychology, value counseling, value empathetic listening and confidence and burnout and thinking through those things. How well skilled would a therapist be to come in and be a consultant for big corporations, or in a lot of different ways? So I want to just encourage you to continue to think differently about your career, about what you're doing, and to keep pushing into areas that you're interested in.
And we could not do this show without our amazing sponsors. And our sponsor for today is Upheal. Upheal is what I wish I had in my practice. It is a game-changing experience where it brings the power of AI into your therapy practice, where you can have secure progress note, analysis, analytics, and ways that you can do even better and save a ton of time. In fact, up to 6 to 10 hours a week. So you can use AI now to help with your progress notes over at upheal.io/Joe and let AI write your therapy notes for you. That's upheal.io/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.